While the guys are coming up, hi, my name's Mark Daly. As Richard kindly said, I work for a company called Epsilon. Funny accent, but I'm based here in London. Thanks, guys. Today we're going to talk a little bit about an interesting topic, paid peering, and what we're seeing in the marketplace, and I guess to some extent as well, what our observations are for the future too. Just a little bit of a monologue on that. Peering has come a long way since it all began. I think the companies that form the peering community, the content and delivery networks, and the eyeball networks effectively have evolved. They've divided into separate camps in terms of the commercial proposition that they consider peering should look like. It's created potential ROI challenges as the growth of peering has exploded, certainly since we've seen even in our own network since COVID hit and everybody went online all at the same time. Traffic extrapolated, I guess, in terms of imbalance for many service providers and many content providers as well. There's been a lot of debate around whether people should pay each other, whether networks should pay each other, content providers should pay. We've seen some well-publicized debates here in the EU around fair trade. We've seen some enforcement at the regulatory level. My company's owned by Korea Telecom. In Korea, there is now enforcement for paid peering. May not be a thing that grows outside of Korea and other specific areas, but it is being enforced in some places. Obviously, we've seen court cases. Netflix, I don't think there's anyone from Netflix here today, but we've seen them involved in court cases. So there's a lot of change happening now. There's government intervention in some areas. And I think it just highlights the fact that this is a contentious issue. Over the last decade in particular, we've seen ISP and networks, they've had to consider this imbalance based, the CFO, looking at how they manage their books. They don't always view the internet as the open trading platform that some of us might envisage and view. So there's a lot of change at the moment, a lot of controversy, and what we've got here is three panelists who are going to help us talk about that, talk about maybe the future as well. I'll let them introduce themselves in a second, but I do want to let people know that their opinions are their own personal opinions and not necessarily of their employees and companies that they work for. So we'll start firstly. James, go ahead.
Okay, sure. Thanks for the intro. For anyone that doesn't know me, my name is James Bensley. I work for Interlink, so we're a carrier based in Europe. We've got about 40 POPs across Europe and US. We're at the best part of about 20 IXPs, a few thousand peers. So for us, public peering is extremely important. We provide IP transit, DDoS, this kind of thing. So it's our bread and butter. We're growing all the time. So the network's been live for like 2.25 years. We've got 40 POPs across the US and Europe, and like I said, 20 IXPs, and lots more in build. So we're growing at a very fast pace, loads of P&Is, and like I said, that's integral to us, to what we do on a daily basis. So we're very firmly in the corner of as much peering as possible, kind of public peering, and also something I'll try and get onto a bit later on, is we're also very keen to shake up the status quo. So we've got some ideas about how we could be doing things differently, which perhaps I'll come on to later. So thanks. Mike?
I don't know if anybody doesn't know me. I've been at LINX for 15 years now, but even before LINX, I worked as a peering coordinator at a LINX member, and my role was to say no. That was really the job description. But I'm not sure there's much more to say, but hopefully I can give some insights, especially how we see it and and what we can do and can't do.
Cool, thank you. Ben?
So Ben Nicklin, I work for Vodafone. Been with Vodafone only since about August. Prior to that, I worked for Edgio and Limelight as their peering director, running the global network for around about 300 terabits of egress capacity. Some would say my exit from Edgio was very well timed, given the state they ended up in, or not anymore. I've also worked I've worked with Market Epsilon, helping develop remote peering products. I've worked at IXs, so I have a good view of kind of the various different angles around the peering kind of market.
Cool. Thanks, Ben. So we might as well start with you. Tell us a little bit about Vodafone's peering policy and your approach to paid.
So Vodafone senior leadership have made the decision, and we've been discussing this for probably about 2-3 years. In fact, I sat with Otto at EPF at 2023 in my previous role, where he told me we're going to move to a paid peering policy. Not sure when, but it's definitely coming. Well, the day is here, and we have actually now started to enforce and going down the paid peering route. There's a lot of challenges in terms of trying to marry up that return on capital when you've got such a huge network sitting behind you. When you look at the amount of content, the amount of delivery coming in from the hyperscalers, and it simply doesn't marry up anymore. So you have to kind of think a little bit differently.
Is this, there's a lot of Vodafones, right? 24 opcos?
Something like that, yeah.
So are you representing that at a global level or individually for the 24 opcos?
So all the opcos that are wholly owned by Vogel Global Services, which is where I sit, are now kind of all into that same camp. And all the peering requests are now filtered back through only two of us, and that's just myself and Otto. We have all the varying opcos, Germany, Romania, etc., where we all have the varying network teams, but they're all now centralized for those decisions to come through one place.
Just two people?
Two of us.
What, bodyguards? Don't need them at EPF?
So I think I might have Mike's old job of just saying no.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, cool. So, I mean, if you're going to maybe not enforce, but encourage people to work with Vodafone in a paid environment, what's your... Are you going to be selective? Like, is it going to be 100% across the board? Are there conditions that you might ask people to meet?
There are going to be certain conditions. We have a steering committee which meets every month. So when we're looking for exceptions to the rule, and they are exceptions, now they might be educational or DNS or for the general kind of good of the internet type places. But I'll be honest, the paid peering model is obviously aimed more at those kind of, I don't want to call them abusing, but the networks that are shoveling, terabits and terabits capacity into your network. They're the ones that obviously this is aimed at kind of recovering more of that. I don't want to say recovering, that's not even the right word, but trying to gain essentially a band-aid on a current problem, which is the return on capital investment.
Okay. And James, with your experience actually across the board, are you seeing, now we know that there have been other tier one operators that had paid peering policies, some of them maybe for a long time, but are you seeing any growth in that?
You mean in the number of people who's rolling out paid peering?
Yeah.
So no. I mean, a very, very, very small amount. So there are a few handful of networks who have or are introducing paid peering policies, so like Vodafone, but it's a real minority. Most networks, and I think there's two reasons for that, basically. So the first reason is when you have what I call free peering, I mean settlement-free peering. Mm-hmm. So there is a cost, but let's call it rudimentary, cross-connect and an optic, right? So when you have settlement-free peering, both sides are a winner. We exchange our traffic now directly. We have knock-to-knock contact. We have low latency, dedicated capacity for a certain service. So everyone here knows that the benefits of settlement-free peering. So both teams are a winner, right? If we don't peer, both teams are a loser. So we can both be winners or we can both be losers. One of the reasons I think there's such a small increase in paid peering is because that makes one side a winner and one side a loser. And that creates a problem because it means the side who is receiving money is potentially less interested in this relationship than the side who's paying. Because if somebody's going to pay for it, it means they really want it. So there's an imbalance in your vested interest in the peering relationship if you're willing to pay for it and the other guy isn't. So that's one issue, is then there's this imbalance of power. Second thing is it really worth the cost? It depends on the price. So I'm based in Germany. Deutsche Telekom, one of the most famous networks for paid peering. I can say without a shadow of a doubt that when I go to events like LINX in Germany, not a single person I speak to who has to pay Deutsche Telekom is happy about it. And it doesn't create a good relationship, but they just see it as some unnecessary hoop that they're going to have to jump through because there's no other way around it. They don't feel they're really getting their value for their money, for example. No one's told me that they feel great about paying, especially because a lot of these tier ones, the price that they're charging for the paid peering is way above like a market rate for a transit connection, for example. So there's these two things. There's the value of it on a financial terms, and also the relationship that comes from it, where you don't have everyone's a winner or everyone's a loser. You have one winner, one loser that kind of comes out. And so that's why I think we see such a small growth in networks switching to paid peering, because if you have this relationship of one winner, one loser, and someone's having to foot the bill for it as well, how are you going to convince anyone to do that? And so, like I said, so we pay significant amount of money to peer with Deutsche Telekom because we have some customers who need that connectivity. It's incredibly important to them to have low latency, dedicated capacity to a paid peering network, so it has value for their service. But those are the minority of people. And we pass that charge on to them, right, as well. So we make it clear to them, this is costing us extra, we pass it on to you, everyone's clear, done. But outside of that, most people we speak to don't want this.
It's interesting, our parent company, KT, has a paid peering policy. It's not across the board, but it is there. And one of the things I've noticed as well is that you get a different lot of or group of people now invested in and working in around the peering environment. That's commercial people. They're now being driven by revenue targets. They're being asked questions by the CFO if those revenue targets go down. So it starts to kind of distort the real value, I think, of peering. It's just my observation at this point. So Mike, do you see right now or in the future any impact on the levels of traffic within an IX environment as a result of the potential implementation of a very, very big brand here in the UK starting to move to paid peering?
Obviously, if Vodafone goes ahead and goes for only paid peering in the UK, I assume that would be outside of the IXPs. That's obviously...
That's the next question.
But it depends on how it's going to be implemented. From our point of view, in the end, these things have happened. I kind of agree with James. I don't think there is a major move into that direction. There are always, over the time, there are always companies who kind of try and change the model, try and see how far they go. Some more successful than others. It will happen. It's our industry. It keeps on changing. We'll do what helps the people in this room. We'll do what helps our members and respond to it. That's really the only thing we can do. We obviously like to have the traffic on our network, but hey. Yeah.
That's a good point, though, you raised. If I ask Ben, I mean, Ben, this is at the start of the process, right? But how do you envisage that engagement model in terms of interconnection? Still use the IX? Are you going to have basically individual interconnects? Are you going to use an aggregator outside of the IX
so for the N times 100s, N times 400s, then obviously that will be dealt with directly by us. Where we have that kind of aggregation layer, we're exploring a few different avenues. As you say, looking at tier 2 aggregation layers, or or even working with some of the IXs, where we can actually kind of envisage some kind of reseller model where they are acting as a reseller for us at that aggregation layer. So the 2, 3, 4 gig providers where it doesn't warrant PNIs and N times 100s. But on the other hand, the other flip side of it is I don't want to be tied up doing contracts the next 100 years on every single small aggregation layer. So I'd rather actually have another provider that can take on that layer for us and deal with that level of support for us. Okay.
And we were talking about this offline before, but the deployment of billing systems or rating engines or whatever it is to start to look at how are you billing companies. And also, if I was to buy your paid peering, I would have to start to put a little more detail, a little more effort into understanding the traffic volumes,
Yeah, we're
auditing that as well. So there's a bit of investment, right?
It is from both sides actually. 'Cause I mean, we're looking at again the other parties, but we're not trying to screw people over here. We're trying to kind of marry up a bit of a gap, which is that where you look at the amount of traffic coming in, and to James's point about the adoption of paid peering, the reason why there aren't that many is because actually most of the CSPs are already doing it and have been for many years. DT, famously, Telefonica, they've been doing it, if you want to do with Spain, so Telecom Italia, Orange, SFR, free, which ironically is never free. They've all been doing this for many, many years. I've been buying their services in my previous role. So I know all of them are already there. Vodafone is that last of the major CSPs that hasn't done it. And we've resisted it for as long as we possibly could, but we've now got to that point now where we kind of the return on the capital for our investment. And again, to James's point about, who's the winner, who's the loser here? Well, the content providers, and I suppose it's more the commercial content guys, because they're being paid to carry that traffic by the content owner. And we did this panel at GPF, in fact, and we had a conversation with PJ from Fastly. And the conversation was, as a commercial CDN, you're being paid to carry that traffic. You're handing that traffic off to me, which is then going to my consumer. So the consumer is getting the content, and the content owner is happy. So, but if you're not making money and I'm not making money, we've got a problem. So how do we fix that problem?
Yeah. Do you have an answer for that?
No. There's no right or wrong. It's, us as an ecosystem here, we have to figure out how do we fix that. I mean, the CDN market is in utter disarray at the minute. In the last 18 months, 2 years, we've lost something like 400 terabits of edge capacity. With Edgio going down, they had about 300 terabits of edge capacity. With the likes of Edgecast and Limelight disappearing. StackPath closed down. Lumen pulled out of the market. So, we're getting to a point now where maybe in another year's time, you might find that you'll have even less CDNs, but then the option becoming that those CDNs can now start driving the pricing back up.
So, Mike, from an IX perspective, enabling a paid peering service via the IX, do you see that as maybe a service or product opportunity that IX could facilitate that? A little bit like what happens in the roaming industry, mobile industry.
Yeah, I think the roaming industry is very specific. I don't see the same model necessarily working in the peering world, simply since the structures aren't there, the systems aren't there. It's pretty hard. I do still think, though, that there is a role where IXPs can be an aggregator of some sort and take away some of the burden. And we've seen, we talked earlier, we talked about different products, like Microsoft with Maps. In the end, it's nothing other than that. It is going into that direction. So there are models out there that can work. I think most of the IXPs are very happy to work with all interested parties to see what options there are. And in the end, especially LINX and other membership-based IXPs, we're here to add value to the members. If there is something that we can do that will continue to make it easier for members to interconnect between each other, we're certainly more than happy to be there.
You touched on Maps as being, essentially, it's a kind of a different approach, right? And I know, I think Epsilon deployed with LINX the first instance. Megaport had done very well recently. Is that model something that you could look at and say, actually, this paid peering model from an IX enablement perspective is already kind of working, so maybe we could do something in that space?
I definitely think there are models that can work. I think there is one element there, since we're definitely not talking about the large PSCs. Since anyway, as you said, your 100 gigs, your 400 gigs, those are PNIs anyway. That hasn't changed. The only thing that changes there is who pays and what gets paid. It doesn't really impact us. A lot of the traffic that we and over the past years we've anyway seen that a lot of the content traffic, it doesn't touch any IXP at all anymore. We're the overflow, and that's fine. That's a perfectly good role to be there. But a lot of the traffic doesn't touch us at all. But a lot of the traffic that goes through us is the long tail. That's still there, which is where the whole, is it paid or not paid? Well, it plays a big role for the small network, but the amount of revenue that we're actually talking about for an organization like Vodafone, it actually is noise. The overhead is probably doesn't even justify talking about making this a paid relationship, which unfortunately means most of the time, well, it means there is no option. There is no paid peering for your 1 gig, 2 gig, 10 gig peers, since it simply doesn't work. So I do think there is a role where IXPs can help in that scenario. How that commercially works is and if actually commercially, if we're talking about exchange of money or not, is a different question, since but I do think there is a role. Just have to figure out which works for all parties involved.
I think, James, as well, you wanted to touch on the commercial model offered by the IX as well, right? And whether we need to look at the services that are provided by the IX and how they charge, and whether aggregation across your entire footprint of services should be looked at in a different way, shape, or form, and how that might affect or reduce the driver for paid peering, right?
Right. So I think, so earlier you talked about the VPP stuff and maps, and now, so if LINX are participating in this aggregating of paid peering for larger carriers, I think there's a problem there. There's another problem we can totally unpack about paid peering, but let's kind of like put that to one side for a second. If we're just focusing on IXP stuff for a moment, then there's definitely a problem there with, I would say, the way the billing happens that would need to be totally changed for the IXP in order to offer some sort of aggregation service. So today, if I took private peering with Vodafone or Deutsche Telekom or China Telecom, or I take transit from somebody, this is always based on, this is usage-based billing. Stuff like LINX, so IXPs, fixed infrastructure like IXPs, like wavelengths, dark fiber, this is not usage-based, this is billed in fixed increments. So any sort of billing via an IXP for, say, a private peering would need to swap to usage-based, in my opinion, which IXPs don't support today, because I don't want to. So, for example, a 100 gig LINX port with 100 gig capacity is like €3,000 a month. I don't want to pay €3,000 a month for a peer that I exchange 25 gigs of traffic with. So that isn't going to work. It would need to be usage-based per meg per second kind of traditional billing, but not, and probably that's not even just for if you're aggregating private. It's more like in general with the LINX. This is a bit of a sidestep, but we have a 100 gig port to LINX. Our port recently hit about 90 plus gigs. Then we're faced with the conundrum of what to do next. Do we spend another €3,000 a month to get another 100 gig port just so we can shift 10 gigs across to that new link? So that doesn't justify €3,000 a month. So we just have to move traffic away from the LINX. But if the LINX did usage-based billing, we could just turn up a second port, start putting some traffic on it, and with time grow the traffic, and with time pay the LINX. And this is all IXPs, not just the LINX, because they all work on this model. We could just pay the LINX more money over time. As our traffic goes, we pay for what we use. So I think that's what I mean. So there's an issue with billing at IXPs in general, having these fixed increments that just doesn't really work for me. We're having discussions with other IXPs right now, actually about peering. So like, LINX has multiple LANs, many IXPs have multiple LANs. We're kind of discussing with other IXPs right now if we can take a port on all of their LANs and just have a shared commit across all of their LANs, which is exactly what you would do with a transit provider like us. Customers have multiple ports with us, you get a shared commit with the usage-based billing. there's no reason that IXPs can't do that as well, because also the difference is that with IXPs, so I said about we've decided not to take a second 100 gig port because the step up in cost is too high. So the difference there is that if they were doing usage-based billing and aggregated across ports, then actually I could give the LINX some revenue. It would be a small amount, and slowly over time we would grow that revenue, but now I'm giving them nothing and not growing it either, because I have to wait till I can justify the next 100 gig port, and so on and so on. So I think if there was going to be something else like paid peering via the LINX, it would be a deal breaker if it was not usage-based.
So I think we're running out of time. Oh, a question, sorry. No, question now is fine.
Just thank you. These have just come through online. So the first one was, if a partner doesn't want to participate in paid peering, doesn't that just create a problem for yourself, as you might have to use transit to reach them? So there's a trend here about the pricing. It sounds like Vodafone need to start charging their actual customers enough to support the service. What value is being added to justify charging? So a couple.
That's a very good question. Ben's going to answer it, but that was a question we were going to ask a bit later on is, what about the impact of the subscriber if you're starting to pay for traffic, as an example? So, over to you, Ben.
So within most consumer contracts, there is the ability to increase pricing mid-term or at end of term, and things like that. In a lot of countries, that's actually regulated. So you can only increase by a certain amount. The challenge we've got is in most OTT hyperscaler CDN markets, the increase in traffic coming from them outweighs massively that price increase we can get from a consumer. So there is a shortfall. So this is where what we're trying to do is we're trying to not go down the kind of the DT route of being that hated partner, but we're just trying to, and even if every single partner actually paid us exactly what we wanted, this barely covers the cross connects. Okay, we've got that many. So we're trying to put a band-aid on a potential issue, but it won't fix the issue. It's just plugging a small gap. But yeah, to your point, from a consumer point of view, we would love to put the price up, but then you end up in this round robin, because if we put our prices up, even if we can, to increase our performance and make it better, we're probably going to lose half our customers who are going to go to the next guy because he doesn't charge as much. His network then gets filled up, which means he then has to go, oh crap, I now need to build something more. So then he has to try and recover his costs somehow. Either that performance suffers, then customers shift to the next guy and the next, and it goes round and round and round.
Yeah, we had with some colleagues a hypothetical discussion around K-pop, being KT, and the attractiveness of that content. So then trying to have a direct established relationship paid with, say, KT to deliver that content to your subscribers, high quality methodology. But then do you charge your subscriber for that content a little bit more? And the discussion we had was it's very difficult. It's going to be really costly. The cost benefit of doing that is negative. So probably not going to happen in the short term. But
that's the challenge. So there is no necessarily right or wrong. It's us as a community, us as an ecosystem are trying to kind of go, we need to fix this problem. Whether or not you're looking at it from a straightforward traditional peering point of view of the balanced traffic, which is the old method we used to use, if you're doing 1-1, 1-3, whatever that ratios are, versus actually in some cases now, and I've had discussion with others, which is, instead of looking at purely traffic profile, you're looking at the overall business relationship.
yeah.
So it might be that you've got other areas you're working with them on, which then offset against something else. So there's no black, white. There are a myriad of shades of grey in the middle that you've got to consider.
I mean, you might be work with a global network provider that you pair with, but at the same time, you're spending millions on subsea cable systems or something with them. So
Precisely.
It becomes much more of a decision right across the portfolio.
You're looking at the holistic global relationship as opposed to one particular segment.
So you've got to be a business analyst as well, right?
Well, there's other people who do that bit. I look at peering levels.
Big company, Vodafone, eh? Was there another question?
Yeah, we got one more, which is that's how to put it across. But it seems the eyeball providers are demanding paid peering simply to seek rent to subsidise incumbent monolithic behaviour. So, what does the panel think? This is open to the whole panel about that sort of model of self-subsidising.
Anyone want to take it?
Yeah, I've got some thoughts. So I think there's a few things to unpick. Excuse me. So probably what we should have done at the start was define what we're talking about when we're talking about paid peering. So one thing is other networks that we interact with who have paid peering, what they're usually offering is full table service. They're offering the full IP transit service, including their own downstreams and their own prefixes and stuff. So that's how it works with Deutsche Telekom and China Unicom and stuff. You get access to all of their prefixes as well as all their peering and everything. And what we see is, so like I said, there is in my opinion, a small use case for paid peering. We have customers who want low latency, high capacity connectivity to the eyeballs of these premium networks. So they pay the fee. But the thing is, they only want access to the eyeballs of that network. They don't want the IP transit, right? And this is kind of an important differentiator to me, which is that companies like Deutsche Telekom are charging a very, very high price per megabit per second because they're giving you this full table service and labeling it as IP transit, but people just don't really want that, right? So for example, we as Interlink, we have really good peering all across Europe. So there's nothing Deutsche Telekom can offer me by giving me a full table. So we throw away all the routes and only keep what they originated, their own downstream customers, because they can't improve on my existing connectivity one bit. And that's the case for most of the tier ones. Every network has got a geographical region where they're really strong and a region where they're not. So for the regions where they're not, I don't want their feed. I only want their on-net stuff. And I think this is an important differentiator to make, that basically, if paid peering was access to those on-net prefixes only and was then much cheaper, there could be some benefit in that. But I don't want a full table for this really high price that is of no use to me. So that for me is a major issue, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had, when I was at Edgeo, we had the same thing. So DT would offer us the full table. Well, actually, bear in mind your price is 9 to 10 times higher than I pay transit. No, I don't want it because I'm going to send you just your routes. I'm going to send you just your traffic. So I'm only paying for exactly what I have to. I'm not going to give you anything excess. But what we've tried to do, so the Vodafone pricing model is actually to try and track roughly around the transit pricing. So we're not trying to do that DT model where we're 10 times higher than everybody else. We're trying to stick to within the transit norm. So people have the choice. If you don't want to use us, be it via principal, and you want to send it via transit, we're fine with that. We'd like you to keep it with us, and it's going to cost you roughly the same if you send it directly to us. But to your point, if we differentiate. So Vodafone is made up of multiple different entities. Each one has their own ASN. So in Germany, if we're talking about Germany, so you have 3209 Voda Germany. So if you take paid peering in Germany, it would be just directly to 3209, and you would get only their routes. We have the 1273, which is the old cable and wireless network, which is now the global transit network, which feeds into those. And we have done it for many years where people take the 1273 as a backup path into those, because on 1273, you can get the global routes, but it also has obviously all the Voda prefixes behind it as well. So that's how we try to differentiate.
Can I just go back to the previous question?
Sure.
So the previous comment as well was about potentially the traffic may get routed kind of long way around if people don't go for paid peering. I think wasn't that what they mentioned about sort of kind of the user? Well, there was a thing about the cost, and then there was a thing about the user may suffer. I think in the question that
drops the user experience, right?
the mic's not working.
Decreases.
Mike.
Apologies, we've archived the question, but the people are in the room, so I think it's great. We can hook you up afterwards.
Yeah.
We have got one more question if you're happy, or do you want?
I'll just quickly finish that then. Was going to say is that, so there was a comment there about people not going for paid peering, and then kind of, the end users are the loser and the content provider are the loser. And I would just point out, so probably most people saw this. This happened recently in Germany, again with Deutsche Telekom, between Deutsche Telekom and Meta. So probably a lot of people saw it. It was in the news. So Meta decided they're paying this terrible price per megabit per second to exchange traffic with Deutsche Telekom. They don't want to pay it anymore, so they stopped paying. Unfortunately for Meta, they didn't actually shut the port down, continued to exchange quite a bit of traffic, and then Deutsche Telekom said, you owe us the money because you kept sending us the traffic. They went to court and Meta lost and had to pay, which is, I don't want to comment on that because that's kind of not my business. The point is this, Meta decided to de-peer, but they don't have any less traffic to exchange with Deutsche Telekom. So the traffic now has to go somewhere else. And on the one hand, Meta comes off actually as a winner, because if they just send it to one of their other tier ones, they would have been getting it for much cheaper than they were paying Deutsche Telekom directly. And as long as those other tier ones maintain good peerings with DTAG, then Meta has now just dropped their price and still getting the traffic to the end customers. Deutsche Telekom comes off of that a loser because their customers may or may not get a worse experience. They may or may not have had to increase the peering with Airlion or GTT or wherever the traffic went. So actually Meta de-peering Deutsche Telekom, probably Deutsche Telekom came out of that as the losers. So it was very hard to then justify why the paid peering was needed in the first place. So going back, but the comment though was that actually the end users are the ones who suffered. I think probably yes, but also maybe Deutsche Telekom as well.
Good answer. Yep.
The next question is, what do you think? Is this the start of a two-tier internet where certain services only become available to certain subscribers?
Hopefully not. There is, to be fair, that the whole net neutrality thing in the US has been around for a long time, and this is where Deutsche, their names popped up a few times because they're kind of one of the biggest cases for this already, where they've kind of been accused of slowing down the internet for people who don't pay. Whether or not that's the case, I don't know. Certainly, from our point of view, I know that we're just trying to be fair and try and treat everyone the same. Like I said, we're not trying to screw anyone over by going insane prices. We're just trying to, in some cases, send a message back of, well, please just don't keep dumping loads and loads of traffic and actually think about what you're doing. Prime example, we've got one of the OTTs that we're working with. So out of all of the OTTs and hyperscalers, most of them are increasing traffic somewhere between 10 up to even 20% per year. We've got one that we've done a lot of video optimization and other work with that we've actually seen a reduction by 5% in 1 year. And what we're trying to do is tell you to the others, well, maybe you need to be more like them. Maybe you need to actually think about your traffic. Try to be a bit more, optimize what you're doing rather than just simply throw more bandwidth at it. Because that bandwidth costs a lot of money.
Mike, do you have a thought on that?
I think there's a lot of interesting thoughts coming out. Just responding to one of the points that James, that you made in regards to pricing that IXPs use. I think we're very well aware, and I think if you look at, and it's not only us, a lot of the IXPs have moved to model to try and bring more flexibility. On 100 gig, you can get a 30 gig, 50 gig service on that, and upgrade as you go. On 10 gig, you can have any bandwidth by now. And I think we see that going into that direction. Going to a bandwidth-based pricing, there's a lot of complexity there to do that, especially if you look at how traffic works across IXPs. It is very burstable. It's an interesting model to make work without having to charge much more for relatively small amount of traffic. But we will never stop trying to find models that might work and that might give more flexibility. And it's the direction that we see where members want us to go, to bring more flexibility, while also trying to keep it a model that is fair to very small networks and very large networks, which can be a bit of a challenge. That's on that one. I think the questions are interesting for there, and it might be, I think for some of the regions in the UK, in Germany, where traditionally, well, you had quite an open peering policy, it's probably going to be a bit more of a challenge to move to that model and see how it works. And the biggest problem that I still see is you don't really, and you said it, you don't want to end up with thousands of contracts, thousands of commercial relationships. So really, the risk is that the smaller networks are the ones that are losing out, since you won't really have an option for them. And that's a bit worrying. That maybe goes a little bit in, well, is it really two classes here? It's the smaller networks and the larger ones, which, yeah, it's become interesting to watch and see.
Yeah, so it's almost like, well, we've got a few questions here, but it's almost like it's not so much the internet itself, but the members of the internet that may become tiered and have different policies applied.
Can I comment on that as well?
Of course.
I would just point out that, so again, because I live in Germany, the whole DACH region is quite well interlinked with itself. So we had a case already, which for people that don't know, is Init7. Init7 took Swisscom to court, and the Swiss court ruled that neither side should be paying the other side for traffic. You should take care of your own cross-connect fees and port fees, so the fixed infrastructure stuff, but neither side should be paying. So I just want to point out that there is a court case that has already happened and fully concluded in Switzerland to point out that kind of paid peering, because this can lead to inequality between operators and networks and the service that your end customers get. So this should actually not happen. Mm-hmm. So this is also potentially something that could happen in other parts of the world, now that there's kind of at least one country has set that legal precedence. I have mentioned already that the unrest in Germany against Deutsche Telekom is pretty high. I find it quite likely that somebody in the near future is going to take a more serious step against Deutsche Telekom.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with the European Commission and the whole fair trade thing. So DT were one of the drivers behind that. And I fear that actually, if the European Commission actually stepped in, DT would actually make less.
Mm. Okay, we have a question.
Okay, that's a fair position, and I think actually that's going to be one of the challenges for your position on this, and that you're not selling it very well. You're selling it as paid peering. What you should be selling is a value-add service that people want to buy into. So if you're saying, yeah, we'll peer with you certain amounts of traffic and things, but you don't get any support or whatever. For the high volume things, so you can do that. You can knock yourself out. You can go via tier 1 or whatever. No guarantees. But if you want a good service, we can do you something that will be cheap in your transit, get all the volume you need and your support. Then that's just a commercial product and has a potential value to those high volume consumers, where they're not being penalised for the traffic. You're actually going to help them and provide them a better service. And I think that would stand up better against court cases like that than just saying, right, you send us lots of traffic, it's abusive, which it isn't. Your customers, they've paid you to have that traffic. So you've got to find a way to actually facilitate it to the mutual benefit of yourselves, so you can continue to have them as customers and for the people providing the content. So I think you need to reposition what you're trying to sell to something that people want to buy.
Yeah, I think this is a really good point. Yeah. I think, I can't speak for Ben, but for us, SLAs, service wraps, high level of guarantee, building up that package, and then talking about the value of the content that you will be receiving in response for that payment. That's a really good point. I think you have to do that, certainly in the future. It's probably something, I don't know.
Oh, certainly something I'll be discussing with the product team.
Yeah.
Can I add
That's
to
a good
that?
point. Yeah.
So this is exactly, I think it's a really good point, because this is the reason we have paid peering with a few networks. It's because we want to have that contract that says we have a guaranteed bandwidth, a guaranteed latency, a guaranteed fixed time. So like I said earlier, I think the use case is small, but where we have it, that, the contract, the piece of paper is really important. That's the thing we've got to shake. Throughout the history of kind of peering, it's always been a best effort basis. And usually people do a pretty good job, but there are a few networks that consistently do quite a crap job. And so it's actually for traffic that is really important, and we do live in an age where internet traffic is really important. Then there are times when you really need a piece of paper. Yeah, and it's worth spending a bit of dosh to get that.
You need that SLA, you need that guarantee.
Yeah, so I think the reframing is kind of a really important thing, because one thing is we have customers come to us and we'll ask them and say, do you want any DTAG traffic? Because if they don't, we'll give you a better price, right? And we have to charge more if you want to send traffic to DTAG. But if you don't want DTAG, we'll give you a better price per meg. And they always kind of say the same thing, which is, they can't understand why we have to pay at all. So like you said, this is kind of an optics, this is a marketing thing. Because the feedback that I often hear from those customers is that basically, the access network already gets revenue from their customers. A lot of CDNs will give you caches to have on your network for free. So they have revenue from their customers, they have free caches, and they still need to charge people for PNIs. This just looks really bad. So I think it's a really good point that this kind of needs to be remarketed somehow.
There's a question in the corner.
A million questions, but I'll try and keep it brief. First, on the DTAG stuff, finally, actually, there is a complaint into the regulator in Germany by a non-profit called Epicenter Works. So look that up if you're interested. I have lots and lots of history with that one, so feel free to ask me outside. But I think the thing that sets DT apart from the others is the constraint of the alternative option. So Ben mentioned, if you don't want to work with us directly, go to another transit provider, that's fine. In the DT case, that is simply not an option. They have constrained the capacity so tightly that if you burst more than, let's say, 10 gigs, you see congestion. There's so much in the news you can read about for yourself for that. That is abuse. Whereas, hey, we've got a bunch of costs and we want to try and cover them, maybe that's not abuse because you still have an alternative way that you can get into the network without getting into that contract. I think that's an important thing to take into consideration, because hypothetical transit access network and hypothetical content network don't agree with each other. Whose responsibility is it to solve a quality issue for a customer reaching some content? Is it access network? Is it content network? Is it intermediary transit provider? Is it a regulator? Mm-hmm. Because there are many different parties involved. Question for the whole panel, whoever wants to answer.
So yeah, with the for me personally, I think the idea of actually having a regulator involved is potentially a bad thing. The hope is that we've all been around this for long enough, and to coin the phrase, we're all big enough and ugly enough, maybe we can actually work it out ourselves. That's the hope. If we go down the regulatory route, which we've seen in South Korea, it ends badly, and the people that do suffer are actually the consumer. So the idea here is to try and work with those providers, work with those content providers. If it is going to be, for instance, via a third-party transit provider, you try and find the offload into a way that doesn't impact your network. So if we take Germany, for instance, well, actually, if I can have them hand over to me in Frankfurt, well, actually, it's going to go from said transit provider to 1273 to 3209, literally in a matter of a fraction of a millisecond across two cross connects in the same building. Therefore, it doesn't impact my user, provided we have done it correctly, provided we have planned, which is what we're trying to do. So we're not trying to be nasty, we're just trying to fill a hole. And it's if we are going to do it that way, let's do it properly. Let's not try and impact anyone.
I think there's a role for the regulator, but not in regulation, but in conciliation, roundtable discussions, to lead those conversations. It might, for the EU, it might be at the EU level, as an example. But I do not want to see regulation, such as in South Korea, become prevalent across the world, because it will create a lot of complexity, and the person that will lose will be the end subscriber, the end eyeball, 100%.
I mean, I have had discussions with CDNs in my time since I've been at Vodafone, And I've had at least one turn around and say that we've never paid for peering, we will never pay for peering, unless we are enforced by regulation to do so.
Are the CDNs the meat in the sandwich, though, to some extent?
Yeah, potentially.
I mean, what I hear from that is you don't want the regulator to be involved, but who is responsible for dealing with those issues?
I mean, the thing is, in any argument, there's one party has a view, the other party has a view. Arbitration, some kind of negotiation, I think, is a good start.
I think to your point, Mark, maybe that is where the regulator can have a point. It's not to enforce, but to arbitrate.
But if it's an arbitration and they have no real power, then
Correct.
Yep.
it doesn't solve a problem.
But starting a discussion helps first.
Sure.
That's what I said. There's no right or wrong. It's a potential challenge.
Yep. Question over there?
Hi, yeah. My name's Ivan Beveridge. So the paid peering side, is that something that, in effect, smaller members will be able to kind of pick up on? That, for example, you wouldn't talk to because they're not exchanging enough traffic?
Yeah, that's ultimately what we're trying to. We're working with a couple of aggregator level that they will be the ones. So if we did actually go down the route of saying, okay, well, we're going to be withdrawing the majority of our traffic from LINX. Here's a provider that can actually do that bit for you.
So is that like layer 3, as Mike's talking about before?
Yeah.
So you're effectively kind of offloading that sort of support and so on onto that other provider?
Correct.
Okay. And the other question I was going to ask, relating to traffic, and presumably that would be, as was said, rather than kind of port level, but usage level. Will that not mean that there's more work that needs doing that's going to cost more than, what you had before? So there's going to be additional expenses, which then presumably you charge for, and so the kind of costs end up creeping up and up?
No. So the business case was done obviously at the C level, where they kind of looked at, okay, well, if we go down this route, this is what it's going to cost us to develop it, support it, everything else, as well as, and this is the aim of what we want to try and recover in terms of revenue. So obviously they've done the entire business case on what actually is involved, and we've still got product development going on. So right now we don't have the ability to usage-based billing. That's another development cost that's still in play. That's going to take us another 6 to 12 months to bring that into place. But yeah, you are right. There is a matter of, well, those things carry a cost. But the idea being is obviously, somebody probably with better figures and numbers than me has sat down there and done the business case and said, right, well, if it's going to cost us this, but we're going to gain that over a 3-year period, that's what we're trying to achieve.
Because I mean, potentially, potentially you'll end up you're costing more than via transit, which I think is kind of one part of what was said. So low latency would be a benefit, more direct cost, but you're paying potentially a significant premium for that. And would there be an SLA associated with it?
Yes.
Okay.
With any paid service, you expect there to be an SLA that goes with it. I've spoken to our competition lawyers at length about this with settlement-free peering. They're kind of saying, well, is there implied contracts here? Well, no, because it's the best endeavours. If we are actually going down the route of you have now a paid service, there is an expectation of support levels and SLAs to go with that.
And would that be with yourselves, or would that be with an aggregator who then have to hand off to you?
So it's going to be both. So if you're contracted with an aggregator, then your first point of call would be obviously the aggregation layer.
Okay, I'll stop talking now.
And James has got a comment as well.
Just more of a general comment. So if you have, this is a comment about a question about Vodafone, so it's to Ben. If you're saying that so I kind of understand from the scale perspective that you're operating at, yes, so kind of having a contract with every single customer and all the cross connects is kind of huge overhead. Totally get that. But the endeavor here is to try and claw back some cost recovery for all the infrastructure they're having to operate for all this capacity delivery. To then have to then re-spend some of the money you clawed back via paid peering on aggregators to aggregate the smaller players for you, seems kind of like there's something wrong here in this cycle of like.
So the aggregation layer is different. So they also would be essentially buying ports from us, and then they would resell that capacity to the end user.
Okay, so the idea is that function is paying for itself.
Yes.
Basically. Okay. But that puts the price up for the smaller guys because they have to pay a higher price to the aggregator in order for the aggregator to make a profit, in order to then pay you.
That depends on the pricing. But yeah, I understand the point, but we've tried to make it so that with the aggregator, there is obviously a discounted rate because obviously they are taking on that risk. So there is a discounted rate for the aggregator, which means that then by the time they've added their part back on, it's back level to what they would normally get from us anyway.
Okay.
That's the aim.
Okay, so it means that there's no scope there yet of kind of the smaller players becoming the second-class citizens because they've got a higher cost per meg.
That's never the intention.
Okay, good.
A similar model happened in the roaming industry about 15 years ago, where the larger networks, for instance, in the US, when they had the smaller mobile operators still, if those of you who are my age can remember, you could go to the US and there were some areas you couldn't roam. That's because there were local small networks who could not get a roaming agreement with Vodafone or O2. So actually, myself and some guys had a startup where we aggregated those small networks. It took off really, really well, and then it was a natural acquisition target at the time. But you could see for someone like Vodafone that has multiple opcos, and there are other mobile operators that have very kind of similar, maybe not as big, you could see that role for an aggregator that's bringing that traffic to a level that's big enough to then have a direct interconnect with Vodafone. It's a possibility. Get some ideas there.
Yeah.
We'll partner on that.
I think we've got two more questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi, this one's for Mike. You alluded to the cost of the ports or the demand of links being much, much higher if we move to a traffic usage-based model rather than a committed port size model. Is there some reason why it's so much more difficult for links to switch to a usage-based model than a transit provider, and the costs which you can pass on to the customers on that? Because right now, if I need 100 gigabits of headroom, I can go to any one of 4 or 5 different tier 1 providers and get 100 gig port for €800 a month. If I want a 100 gig port from LINX, it's about €3,000 a month. So it's making headroom at LINX really uneconomical compared to tier 1 transit providers. And is this something that makes it more difficult for you than for tier 1s to provide headroom at an economical rate?
Interesting question. I don't think there is anything that makes it more difficult for us. It makes it more difficult than what we currently do, and everything that adds overhead to what we currently do has an impact on costs. But I'm not. As I said, I'm not saying it's impossible. And I think you probably also agree that we have done quite a bit over the past couple of years to remove a lot of these hurdles, make it much easier, especially probably less for people who want overhead in the ballparks of 100 gig, 200 gig overhead. That's maybe we don't have a solution yet for that, but I think everybody hopefully agrees that, especially for smaller networks, upgrading the flexibility you have on 10 gig and below, and the options to upgrade to 100 gig port with lower service levels. Hopefully we're going into a direction that makes sense and makes that much more attractive. Not saying there isn't more we can do, and I think everybody will agree within LINX that we're constantly looking at what other options we have to make it possible. Moving to usage-based, there is, and hopefully you agree, there is additional complexity if you do that. Especially, as we said, there is quite a lot of traffic on exchanges these days that is very burstable. That only happens on the weekend, on Sunday at 8 o'clock in the evening, since there is a soccer game. We still would need to build the capacity to handle all of these peaks although knowing we might only get paid for that during very short periods of time.
Yeah.
So there is no doubt that there is a cost impact that is there.
That right now, there's quite a large incentive to move bursty traffic off of public peering because of the cost. So, for instance, we've DP'd everyone who sends us DOS traffic because it's far cheaper to take that on transit, for instance. We notice that when there's big events like football, the CDN starts spilling over quite quickly to transit rather than keeping it on the IX, even if I've got plenty of capacity left on my IX port. So it does seem that the current model is shooting oneself in the foot quite a lot in terms of encouraging traffic to stay on the exchange.
Certainly perfect feedback, and that's what we want. I think if there's more we need to do to make it work as the way networks are using internet exchanges, if we have to continue to adopt more, we're certainly the last ones who wouldn't want to do that. So yeah.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So there's also multiple ways you can go around it, right? So we're having these conversations already with, I said earlier, we're having a conversation with a couple of other IXPs. We're looking at turning up ports at all their LANs, and having a shared commit across the LAN. But there's other ways you could do it. So it could be usage-based, 95th percentile. Another way to do that is to actually stay as you are now, where you have the fixed increment of bandwidth. So for example, we get a 400 gig port, but you just discount it 75% to 100 gig, and we're only allowed to use 100 gig, right? And then at some point we want to bring it up to 200 gigs, so you change my 75% discount to a 50% discount, and chunk it up like that. Kind of, there's kind of easier ways as well. It doesn't have to be a complete switch to, if 95th percentile billing or something is a big change, there's another way you could kind of work the billing out. But I see the usage-based billing as a very important part of the future in the market. So we already have, for example, 400 gig wavelength providers. They are billing us on 95th percentile. So my 400 gig wavelength is full. I want to add a second one. I don't want to pay all that money. I only need 5 more gigs of capacity. So they just charge me 95th. And over time, as I put more traffic on the link, the value of the link increases to me, so I pay more money because my usage goes up. So that's so we already have that. We already have wavelength providers who charge us usage-based for wavelengths. We're having the discussion with other IXPs. So I think it's kind of like not an if, but a when sort of thing.
We're out of time? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I was kind of on board with the high volume being the problem and maybe there needs to be a way to finance around it. But then you moved on to lower traffic's bad too. It sounds like peering is just not your business at all. Maybe you just need a better transit provider rather than distort all the market around you.
Well, we are a transit provider, but I don't recall going down saying that the smaller ones are the problem.
Well, you said you needed an aggregator for lesser volumes.
Yeah, that's purely from a contractual and support point of view. Not from a traffic point of view. The traffic, the big offenders from the traffic point of view are essentially the content, where you are so far out of ratio that you're just, again, this is where we go back 20 years ago when it was megabits. Now we're doing massive terabits, and it's all going one way.
Yeah, but that ratio stuff has been sorted long ago. That's just that you're very bad at selling hosting services.
We've never sold hosting services.
I think the smaller one is more around business and consolidating costs, reducing costs. That's purely a business decision, really, rather than any kind of network engineering and design and architecture. That's when other people from other parts of the business, usually with an F in it, start to get involved. So I think it's less about the internet and more about managing costs.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with all that. It's when you sort of introduce a new thing, the aggregator thing, that you think, what's the point of that? It's a transit provider. That's already well covered.
Yeah, but I think what we can do in terms of differentiation of, say, this aggregated concept is still direct peering, but you're bringing one traffic pipe into him, the direct peering, as opposed to transiting and kind of losing control as it goes along the route. So I think there's interesting opportunity for that, but I think it's also very specific to the types of businesses that Vodafone is, and there are mobile alliances, particularly in the Asia Pacific, that meet together. I'm not sure regulatory specifically how they interwork with each other, but they tend to work very closely together. So there's opportunities even to work for multiple entities, multiple companies in certain regions, I think, too.
Okay, I mean, I can buy paying for a thing that is value add that adds
Sure.
value to both sides, but I think
that makes
it
sense.
becomes unstuck, particularly when regulators start to look at these things, that they start to look like mechanisms to distort the market.
Yeah, I think regulators pay close attention to what's going on in the industry right now, and they certainly pay close attention to when we have legal proceedings and other regulators starting to get involved. I think it's difficult to know our mainstream regulators, particularly here in the EU and the United Kingdom, how involved they'll get, but they're paying attention.
Yeah, and that people are going to innovate products until the regulators get involved.
Correct.
Because that's going to be on the clamp on them, and we'd just rather not go there and just
In the first place.
exercise a bit more caution in the products and don't attract their attention, and we can carry on happily.
Yeah, well, that would be nice.
But so to Brandon's point though about so the smaller guys still have to go through an aggregator to reach Vodafone, for example. There's then a risk there that they just won't. And so Vodafone's direct peering reach will dramatically sink. And then the losers from that are the Vodafone customers. So one thing that pops up, but I'm thinking about this paid peering policy, is because you have a volume of traffic, this huge volume that you need to shift somewhere. But actually, what about the really important traffic that's a tiny volume? So for example, VoIP providers, gaming providers, this stuff is very low volume, but very packet loss sensitive, delay sensitive and stuff. And these people aren't going to pay. They currently peer for free now. If the choice is no peering or paid peering, they may just go no peering. So then you potentially, Vodafone has this extensive peering right now. You potentially risk shrinking that peering edge because of all those low traffic peers, but important traffic peers may disappear. Is that something that was kind of factored in?
To a point, like I said, that's why we have that steering committee where if there are meant to be exceptions to the rule, for whatever reason, they can be reviewed and assessed by that committee where we can all have a say. And we put our points across. And again, both myself and Otto both sit on that, as well as a couple of the higher ups. So,
What are the divisions or what's the representative divisions?
So we have products, we have carrier, we have finance, we have the peering side, technology.
Account management /
That comes in from the carrier side.
Carrier.
But that's the sales team. They do have a voice. But again, we've had some heated debates on there where Otto and I have been fighting for one thing, kind of as the subject matter expert, saying, well, this is what we need to do because, and it has got occasionally heated.
It feels like a good approach, though.
We've tried to make it as fair as we can, whilst trying to solve a problem.
Okay.
But
I think
without
we have to wrap it
disrupting
up
too much.
now, unfortunately. Look, I just want to thank the panelists. It's not always easy to volunteer to come up and talk about a topic in front of your peers. So thank you, guys. I think you did a great job. So thank you.